Good evening and welcome back to the Central Hall, Westminster, for the third and final of our battleground debates involving the party leaders. Our guest this evening is the leader of the Liberal Party, David Steel, enjoying a brief separation from his colleague and co-leader of the Alliance, Dr. Owen. As before, our panel of voters, many of whom have stayed with us for all three programmes, come from the three important marginal constituencies, Calder Valley, Cheltenham and Dudley West. So without further ado, here's our first question from Brenda Wood of Calder Valley.
Hello, Mr. Steele.
Hi.
The two previous programmes have featured party leaders. Is the fact that you're on your own a sign that you are now the Alliance leader?
No, it isn't, any more than the sign that David Owen was on his own last night on World in Action meant that he was the Alliance leader. We've had the advantage of having the two leaders. It means we've covered different parts of the country, as we have done again today. We've been together at the press conference in the morning, and we'll be together at a rally tonight. I think that's quite enough togetherness. It's quite a good idea to be able to cover twice as much country and twice as much television by being in different areas at different times.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Gentleman next to you.
Yes, Mr. Steele, don't you think that the age of two party leaders is beginning to come to an end, and really what the public's looking for is one leader and perhaps a team underneath that leader?
Well, I wonder if you're right about that. I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to speculate on, but we believe that the sight of two parties working together on an agreed programme has actually been quite encouraging in a country which is used to political parties maximising their differences, seeing how much they can disagree with each other. We actually have come together on an agreed programme. And notice this, that during the election campaign, our manifesto, which was very carefully costed and carefully prepared, they've tried to tear it apart, they haven't succeeded, whereas other people's manifestos have frayed a bit at the edges during the campaign. So I think the fact that there are two parties and two leaders is not necessarily a bad thing at all.
Alan Lansdell of Calder Valley has a question on this topic.
Hi, Mr. Steele. In view of the decline in support for the Alliance, do you regret your association with the SDP?
Well, first of all, I refute that there's any decline in support for the Alliance, because it's quite clear that as we come towards the end of the campaign, the vote is holding absolutely rock solid, and we expect to get that sort of last 48-hour surge, which has been a feature, actually, of all our victories. I mean, no opinion polls predicted we were going to win Greenwich, no opinion polls predicted we were going to win Rydale. It's all come away at the end, and I think that's going to be the same this time round. So I certainly don't regret the formation of the Alliance. I think that what it has given, as I can speak as leader of the Liberal Party, is that it has added the weight of experience of the Gang of Four and others who have come in to the Alliance and who have had experience of government. And I think that, together with the traditional values and integrity of the Liberal Party and its great history, has added a new dimension to politics.
Mrs. Howarth of Cheltenham has a question for you.
Good evening, Mr. Steele.
Hi.
If my standard of living is much better now than it's ever been, why should I change parties?
I think it's quite possible that your standard of living is higher than it's ever been. I'm assuming from what you say that you may be a wage earner or married to a successful wage earner, in which case your income has probably, in the last few years, increased above the rate of inflation. So you're probably actually materially rather better off now than you were 3 or 4 years ago. Now you say, if that is so, why should I vote other than Conservative? I think there is more to life than just your own household income. If in fact the result of the policies of the government has been to depress the public services of health and education, or to create areas of mass unemployment, and I respect the fact that where you are that isn't so, but nevertheless they exist in other parts of the country, if society as a whole becomes more tense, more divided, and we see a rising crime wave, increases in violence, increases in drug taking, we can't honestly say that we have created a more contented society or more successful society than we had a few years ago. And just because some people, in fact quite a lot of people, are materially better off with money in their pockets, doesn't mean to say that the most important thing in life is taking another 2 pence off income tax. Perhaps the most important thing is to make sure that our schools are properly maintained, that the health service queues don't grow longer. And you know, if you've got to make a choice, you've got to get a balance between the personal wealth of the individual and the wealth and contentment of society as a whole. And my criticism is that I think this government has got that balance wrong.
Let me take a straw poll. Let me take a straw poll and ask you to put your hands up if you feel you have become better off in the last 4 years. And those who feel they definitely haven't become better off in the last 4 years. I would have thought that split pretty evenly.
It's about 50-50, but then you see, I've just come today from the centre of Liverpool, and nobody could say that that is a city as a whole which is better off, because it has lost so much revenue over the years. It has suffered from the extremes of political infighting, which we all know about, needn't go into here. But the fact is that there are great areas of our country which, as a whole, not the individuals in it, but as a whole, are much worse off now than they were 7 or 8 years ago when this government came to office.
Interesting, Mr. Sisson. Interesting, because if you looked at the vote then, the hand vote, it was the areas of unemployment that were worse off, and Cheltenham in the centre, where that unemployment doesn't exist, they were better off.
Well, that's not surprising, is
No,
it?
it isn't. No,
But it doesn't.
What you said.
But it doesn't mean to say. I mean, I take it from what you're saying that you're from the Midlands constituency,
I'm
or
from Cheltenham.
You're from Cheltenham.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's Calder Valley, Cheltenham, Dudley West.
Oh, they're split up that way, right? Okay, but the point I'm making is that doesn't mean to say that people living in Cheltenham or any other area of the country that's fairly prosperous have got absolutely no sense of social conscience or no responsibility to the rest of the country. I think that the whole development of the north-south divide is something very unhealthy in Britain, and I think that there ought to be a greater determination in the country that that's got to be reversed.
Gentleman there.
Mr. Steele, I'd like, if I may, to go back to probably the earlier question, actually, because your eagerness to overcome these problems regarding poverty and unemployment, is it inconceivable that just the Liberal Party would be prepared to form an alliance with, say, a Labour Party?
It is inconceivable, because we have made a political agreement with the SDP that sticks, and it sticks not only through this election but after the election also. And we made it very clear right at the beginning that if there were a balanced parliament, the decision about what we would do then would be taken by the MPs meeting collectively. So there's never been any question of the Liberal Party going one way.
I'd like to stop you on that topic there, because there are questions that we'll come to later on that. Has anyone got another question on the topic in hand, on the standard of living, on switching allegiance because of it? Gentleman at the end.
Yes, as regards the actual finance that people are, the situation that we're in, surely people must think that it isn't just the individual and your finances, but the country as a whole, the balance of payments. When you mention balances, surely under this present government that we've had, the balance of payment situation, you must agree, Mr. Steele, is far better than it was under the previous government.
Yes, that
You've
is.
got to get these things right.
That is quite true, but let's analyse why it is so. This government has one great asset that no previous government, Labour or Conservative, has had, and that is the revenues from North Sea oil. And if you take away the revenues from North Sea oil, the balance of trade has gone into reverse. We have become, under the lifetime of this government, an importer of manufactured goods rather than an exporter. That's very unhealthy for the future of our country, and that's why we lay such stress on investment in the country's future, using the oil revenues for that, rather than for current expenditure on the length of the dole queue, which is what's happened to the money.
Now, Mrs. Vicky Stone from Dudley West has a question for you.
Good evening, Mr. Steele.
Hi.
In view of Mr. Reagan's latest initiative on AIDS, would the Alliance support similar controls in this country?
Well, I think we've been very slow, and I'm prepared to accept my share of blame for this. I think we've been very slow in this country generally in waking up to the threat from the AIDS disease. The government has put in a certain amount of money. It's been rather late. I hope not too late. But I know for a fact that Professor Jarrett, for example, in Glasgow University, who's one of those pioneering in this field, was until recently having to go to the United States to use laboratories there because the facilities were not available for him here. And I think that demonstrates some of the effects of the cutbacks in research and development generally in Britain.
The question was about whether you would support the sort of restrictions that President Reagan is bringing in. For instance, AIDS tests for all immigrants to the United States were announced last night.
I think that it is sensible that in the course of routine medical procedures, AIDS testing should be automatic. After all, other kinds of testing has been more or less automatic for quite a long time. I wouldn't regard that as a breach of civil liberties. But could I just say that I do feel that this is an issue which ought not to be, and indeed is not, a matter of party controversy. But I think it's a very good example of the sort of thing where the electorate are entitled to say, what are you doing in the House of Commons on a collective basis on this issue? After all, in time of war, the parties come together and form defence committees and so on together. And surely the AIDS crisis and the threat of AIDS is an issue where the House of Commons should be seen to be working in cooperation. And I regret very much that we still have the government operating on its own in the old conventional way.
Pete Cresswell from Cheltenham has a question for you.
I have. Evening, Mr. Still. Before I get on to my question, what would you do if you had AIDS?
I've never contemplated the question. Why do you ask me?
Just topical. Perhaps things might work a bit faster, or you might find suddenly new procedures for dealing with it.
Well, I think we're getting a bit away from campaign.
No, it's all right.
issues,
I don't think I have any magic solution to the AIDS problem. I just think that politically it is an issue which threatens the whole of society. It threatens the economics of the health service for the future. For that reason, I think we ought to be working together on the problem. I don't have any magic solution to it.
Now tell us the question you were going to ask.
The question I had in mind was, could you please define positive discrimination, and can you guarantee the reduction of ghettos and no-go areas in black communities?
Positive discrimination.
What are you getting at there?
In employment and that sort of thing.
How do you define it? It is part of your policy manifesto. What is positive discrimination?
Positive discrimination means, for example, looking at the condition. I mean, you can have positive discrimination on sex grounds or race grounds. When you look at the number of women, for example, on appointed bodies in this country, it is about 1/5. It ought to be, in logic, much more equal. Therefore, there ought to be a process of positive discrimination to get more women into the public life of this country. Now, the same is true of the ethnic minorities. They tend to be underrepresented. If there is suggestions of hidden racism in employment policies, then I think positive discrimination is perfectly acceptable as a means of ensuring that nobody in this country is disadvantaged because of the colour of their skin or their sex.
Mr. Timothy Garbutt has a related question. Where is he? He's from Dudley West.
Good evening, Mr. Steele. Do you and the SDP Liberal Alliance feel that the current laws on immigration are satisfactory? And if not, what will you do about them?
No, I don't think they're satisfactory at all. I think they work extremely harshly in terms of the family life of those already here. I mean, there is broad agreement that there is no case for, and there's no need for, and there's no demand for new immigration into Britain. But what I think is very cruel at the moment is that people who want relations visiting here or spouses or children find themselves up against the most horrendous difficulties. I was dealing with a case just the other day of a couple who have been settled in this country for a very long time, making a major contribution, incidentally, to the life of their own community. And they had 3 uncles they wanted to bring over for a once and for all life holiday, just as one might from Canada or Australia. And they have had the most horrendous problems in getting the necessary visas, even though they had the return tickets in their hands, and they've not been allowed to come, and they've got to go through appeals procedure. They've been travelling backwards and forwards to the High Commission in Bombay. I find all that sort of thing really rather distasteful. If this government believes in the virtues of family life, they shouldn't be discriminating in that way against those who want to enjoy a full family life.
Having said that, where do you draw the line?
Having said that, how do you draw the line?
On a family basis, bringing people into the country that
I'm
maybe
talking
related.
about people coming for a 3-month holiday. Surely you're not wanting to draw lines at that. It's a basic human freedom to have your relations visit you, surely. I think the present rules are very arbitrary and very harsh on the families who are living here.
Now, a change of topic. Mark Ellis from Dudley West has a question. A lot of people have asked very similar questions, but let's hear from Mark Ellis.
Mr Steele, in the case of a hung parliament, David Owen would support the Conservatives. Is it not true that you would prefer to support a Labour Party?
No, well, neither of these propositions is true. What we have both said is that we would judge, in the event of a balanced parliament, how most effectively to pursue the programme that we have here, and in particular, how we would best tackle unemployment and how we would secure electoral reform. And we have said over and over again that in doing that, we have no bias towards the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. But as we're now only 2 days away from polling day, I think it is fair for me to say to you that the way all the polls are predicting the outcome, it's quite clear that there isn't going to be a Labour government, whatever other results there might be. And therefore what we've got to face up to is, can the alliance between now and polling day actually stop the return of a third Thatcher unfettered government? That's the issue.
Well, are you satisfied with that answer?
I don't think he's answered the question. David Owen has categorically stated on television he would support the Conservatives.
No, with respect, he didn't. If you're talking about the Robin Day interview, and I was actually sitting with him round the table at the time, and so my recollection is probably a little clearer than yours. He was asked specifically on the issue of defence, where he said that the Labour Party's policy on defence was unacceptable to him. But we've made it clear all along that if we were talking to a Labour Party, we could not accept their defence policy. But he has never said that he would prefer to work with the Tories rather than Labour, and that's a misquotation.
Gentleman up there.
Are you going to insist on a referendum for proportional representation before any deals?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Are you going to insist on a referendum for proportional representation before you enter any agreement with the party?
We're not insisting on a referendum, but we certainly don't exclude that as a possibility. You see, if you look at our demands for proportional representation, surely the first case is in local government. We would have none of these problems of the so-called loony left councils. We'd have none of the problems of government having to take away powers and take away money from councils if they were all had to be elected by proportional representation, because no extremist group would be able to get a majority. So that would be point one. Then you've got the European elections coming up in 1989. We would insist that they be proportional, as every other country in the community is. And then, once people had a chance to vote in local elections and Euro elections on a proportional basis, we would be quite willing at that point to say, okay, we are pressing for PR for Westminster. If you other parties don't yet agree with it, put it to the people in a referendum. By that time, they'll have experienced what a PR system is, how easy it is to mark your ballot paper 1, 2, 3 instead of an X.
But you expect a start to be made on proportional representation?
Absolutely, and there's no reason why we shouldn't start right away at the very start of the new Parliament with putting PR into local government.
Barbara McKeekan from, if that's how you pronounce it, from Calder Valley.
Yes, McKeekan.
McKeekan.
I don't think you can leave the statement David Owen made and dismiss it so easily. I personally know 2 lifelong Liberals who have resigned from the Liberal Party and disgust at what he said. There's a strong tradition in the Liberal Party which the leaders all seem to be denying now, and that is towards disarmament policies. Do you not think you're losing a heck of a lot of support by allying yourselves with David Owen and his policies?
But what you don't understand is that there is a very strong push for disarmament in our manifesto at the present time. All that we are saying is that, unlike the Labour Party, we believe that you've got to hang on to what you have now until you can get into proper negotiations.
But a lot of your Liberal voters disagree with that. A lot of them would support a Labour Party policy.
Some do, but not very many. The fact is we have, of course, within the Liberal Party, a very strong Quaker tradition, strong pacifist tradition, but the bulk of the Liberal Party has always said, indeed the Liberal Assembly even said, let us retain the Polaris deterrent and put it into future negotiations. Now that is the position that we hold now. We are totally opposed, both parties, to the Trident missile programme because we believe that an 8-fold increase in Britain's nuclear capability at a very time when the rest of the world is hoping that the Soviet Union and the United States, and hoping with some justification, are going to start reaching agreements on reducing nuclear weaponry. We're totally opposed to that, and we've made that position quite clear. We've also said that we are prepared to see our existing deterrent negotiated away in return for real guarantees of our security. So we have a very strong disarmament profile in the manifesto.
Anyone like to take David Steele up on that?
Just going back to proportional representation, which you touched upon there, the trouble is, Mr. Steele, nobody really understands it. When I talk to people and try to persuade them to vote Alliance, they say, well, I don't understand the mechanics of PR.
But don't you accept my point then, that if you're right, and I dare say that you're right to some extent, that if we introduced it for local government, say this year, so that the next round of local elections next May, people actually had to vote on a proportional system, found out how easy it was, saw how the system worked, that then it would be quite reasonable to put the issue to a referendum as to whether we should have that system for Westminster.
Right, but let me ask you briefly this. Could it be that some of the principal planks in your manifesto, like PR, are not being adequately explained? They are quite complicated concepts.
That is my concern.
Yes, it may well be. It may well be so, and that's a fair criticism. But I just make the point that when you look at the daily press in this country, Fleet Street press, I'm not talking about the good quality newspapers that are published throughout the country, but the Fleet Street tabloids are carved up between support for the Tory party and support for the Labour Party. You get page after page after page of propaganda. I mean, they become Labour Party and Tory party broadsheets during the election. We have only got one small circulation paper, growing circulation, I'm glad to say, the Today newspaper, which gives us fair coverage at all.
On the
let me just conduct another quick straw poll. Hands up those of you who understand what the Alliance are talking about when they talk about proportional representation. And hands up those who don't know what is meant by proportional representation.
Well, there you are. You've proved your point. There's a majority still need to be convinced.
That is surprising, isn't it?
Yes, it is surprising.
It was 3-2.
Yep.
Those who didn't understand what
well, in that case, so you've made your point, And you've underlined my view that we ought to start by introducing it into local government so that everybody then understands how it works.
With the pamphlets that came around from the Alliance, a small pamphlet just on that subject alone would have been a great help.
Right. Well, that's a very positive suggestion. It's a little late for this campaign, but we'll maybe take it on board for future.
Okay, let's move on to Mrs. Suzanne Oliver from Dudley West.
Good evening, Mr. Steele.
Hello.
Living in Dudley, we have seen a marked increase in crime and violence in the town centre, during the day as well as at night. What are your policies with regard to law and order?
First of all, we want to increase the number of police available in this country. The figure we put on it is 4,000, of which 3,000 would be new recruits and a further 1,000 would be taken off tasks that could be supplemented by civilians. So that is part of our costed programme, is to increase the police force by 4,000. You can only get effective community policing if there are enough police to go around. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we are, as far as the crimes of violence are concerned, we are very worried about the portrayal of violence in the media. And that's why in our programme we've also said that we would like an immediate Royal Commission to report within 12 months and work with journalists and television producers and so on and establish, if they can, whether there is a link between the portrayal of violence in the popular press and in television is having an imitative effect on violence in the streets. We suspect that it is, but we don't know, and we don't think this, again, should be a matter of argument between the parties. Let us have an expert Royal Commission to look into that. And I think a lot of people are worried about the effects of violence in the media and the possible side effect on violence.
Do you want to come back on that?
But just may I add one other thing? I'm not one of those politicians, like the leader of one of the other parties, who denies that there is a link between the growth of mass unemployment in certain areas and despair among our young people and the development of antisocial attitudes. I think there is a link, and that's why I believe it's so important that the government of the day tackles these social issues as well as having policies to deal directly with crime.
Mrs. Joy Harrison from Cheltenham is concerned about crime.
Mr. Steele, although members of Parliament are elected to represent the people, only very occasionally do they seek the views of the public on issues of a non-political nature. Would it not be more democratic if controversial proposals concerning law and order were decided by the electorate as a whole?
What had you in mind?
Referendum.
On?
Law and order.
Capital punishment?
Well, yes.
Yes. I thought you were hinting at that, so I wanted to say it. No, I feel very strongly about this. It's a matter for individual MPs. It's not a party issue. There are members of my party who support capital punishment. There are members of other parties who oppose it. So it isn't a party issue. But I can tell you my view very strongly. There is undoubtedly a gap between the views of Parliament on a free vote, as it's regularly been taken since the mid-1960s. Every time there's been a free vote, it's been for abolition. If you take a poll among the public, every time it's for capital punishment. Now, why should that gap exist? I can only suggest you one reason. It's one that I feel very strongly about. And that is that we have to look at the cases where there have been miscarriages of justice, both those in the time when there was capital punishment and those since where people have subsequently been released from jail when they found there's been a miscarriage of justice. When we are casting our votes in the House of Commons, we're not just answering an opinion poll. We are having to examine the facts very, very carefully, and we're having to carry the responsibility for the decisions that are taken after our vote. And I believe that's the only reason why there is a difference between MPs on a free vote and the public in an opinion poll. And I think ought to keep the parliamentary responsibility for these matters.
Do you agree?
Well, I feel that it would possibly halt some of the violence.
Well, you see, one of the things that we do look at is what is the rate of murder in the different states of the United States, some of which have capital punishment and some which don't, because it's not a federal matter. Each state has its own laws. And unhappily, there is no evidence whatever that there is any difference in the murder rate between those states that have it and those that don't. So that the argument, which is popularly believed that it acts as some kind of deterrent to the rate of murder, it doesn't stand up. And that's the sort of thing we have to look at with very great care before we take our decisions.
I'd like to change the topic there and go to Barbara McKechnie again, because she has an interesting question for you.
Should local communities have the deciding say in whether or not nuclear waste is dumped in their locality?
Yes, I think they should. And one of the things I did in this last Parliament was I visited 2 of the 4 sites that were being explored by NIREX for the dumping of nuclear waste, and I lent support to those communities. I may say that that was a very good example of successful community pressure, farmers, teachers, churchmen, everybody was involved there. And then suddenly, on the eve of the election, lo and behold, the announcement was made that the government was not going ahead with any of those 4 sites. And I think, I found that as a Democrat very cheering, that local community protest can work very successfully.
I don't think it did. I think it was pure electioneering. But if you actually support local communities, then no local community is going to want nuclear waste dumped on their doorstep because we don't have the technology for storing it for the length of life that it has.
The very fact that the government was forced to abandon any attempt to look for sites anywhere on land for the dumping of nuclear waste was a very good thing. And I think if those communities had simply said, oh, well, you know, we're opposed to this, but we're not going to do much about it, I doubt very much whether the government would have changed their mind. I think these sites would still be being explored today.
I think you're quite right to sites after June 11th.
You're quite right to say, oh well, you know, it was fortunate for them that an election was coming along, but nevertheless they were very successful protests.
Endeavouring to cover as many issues as possible, Helen Varley of Calder Valley has a question for you.
Has the Alliance any new initiatives to deal with the Northern Ireland problem? It's a perennial problem.
Well, I think I would be the Archangel Gabriel, not the leader of the Liberal Party, if I had an automatic solution to Northern Ireland. The particular initiatives we have in mind are that, first of all, the anti-terrorism legislation should be the same in Westminster as in Dublin. There should be closer coordination, and we would favour the setting up of a joint security commission, which would enable the police forces to operate in closer cooperation with each other across the border. And that's a specific proposal that we make in order to strengthen the effectiveness of joint cross-border cooperation in the security field. But other than those immediate measures, I think all we can do is say to the people in Northern Ireland, we hope that you will support those movements, whether in politics or outside politics, who are clearly established against bigotry on both sides, which is why David Owen and I have been over to Northern Ireland, unlike the other party leaders in this campaign, to reassert the responsibility of the United Kingdom of what happens there. And we have given our support to the same name, but no connection, Alliance Party of Northern Ireland, because they are the only party who have a large component of both Protestant and Catholic among their membership and their candidates.
Wouldn't it help, perhaps, if the British parties did organise and put up candidates in Northern Ireland?
Well, we thought of that, but since there is now a non-sectarian party there with a programme very similar to ours, we felt it was right simply to give them support, and that's what we have done. The province has its distinctive political flavour. We want very much to get back to a power-sharing assembly. We want to see devolution succeed. We want to see a parliamentary tier in the Anglo-Irish agreement. We shouldn't just leave it to ministers and civil servants. We ought to see representatives from Dublin, from Westminster and from Belfast sitting down together in a democratic chamber.
Lynn Jones from Dudley West, we are up against our time, has a final question for you.
What do you think of your image on the Spitting Image programme?
You know, David Owen and I have been asked this together on a number of occasions. I think it's a rotten image. I think it's grossly distorted. But never mind. The important thing about politics is if you cannot have the ability to laugh at yourself, then you shouldn't be in politics. That's my view. So don't take it too seriously.
Oh,
I
no,
don't.
It's just that.
Very brief supplementary.
On the subject of your image, Mr. Steele, do you not think that your ladies' man, gentleman image with the female electorate was seriously damaged by the recent Claire Rockus incident?
No, but
I think it was great.
No, but somebody. You thought it was great. Somebody pointed out to me that unhappily that had taken up about 3/4 of the annual ration of Liberal Party publicity in most of the tabloids.
And that's where we end it, and indeed where we end our battleground debates with the 3 party leaders. Our thanks to David Steele.
Thank you.
A few reaction shots.
I see reactions of us or reactions of them.
If you can all
a lot, I think.
But, so that's Cheltenham. That's
Dudley West. That's Calder Valley.
Calder Valley,
Cheltenham.
Dudley West.
You better go and give them a good talking to before they go, because they'll be declaring right at the top of Thursday night. Yeah.
Who comes first? Who comes first on Thursday night?
No, Torbay say they're going to declare first on.
Did they do last time?
Yes.
Were they first last time? Yeah. But Cheltenham close behind.
Yes. And Cheltenham will be. Torbay doesn't really matter when it comes to projecting a result for the election, but Cheltenham does because you get some real data.
It sounds as though it's going to be quite close in Cheltenham. I was there the other day. It looks. What? What did you say?
He's a local manager, Charlie Irving, a very well respected local man. Yeah. It's going to take some beating there. If you can beat him, with a chance. Across the country.
Whereabouts are you on Thursday night?
I'm going to be at home in Ettrick Bridge. I'm going to go to my own count and I'm going to stay there. Fortunately, I've cost ITN a fortune by setting up satellite dishes outside my house. The only way they can get signals from Ettrick Bridge into the London network is to send signals via satellite somewhere above Chad in Central Africa.
It goes from Ettrick Bridge to Goonhilly in Cornwall up to a satellite above Gabon.
That's right,
back
and
down
back
to
again.
the post office tower.